Hello and welcome to this fire safety session. What I'm going to try and cover in this session today is a bit of background to fire safety and I guess some of the reasons as to why we do fire standards and try and make improvements. Also the various roles of the people involved, particularly what I call the first responder. I'm going to talk a bit about what we would like you to do as part of this process. Fire evacuation and the different interpretations of it. How we can then use spread of fire to then think about how we can contain it, and also the links then between once a fire starts, how we can put it out in terms of fire extinguishers. And the last bit about evac chairs and refuge points is covered on a separate session, but I'm just going to talk a tiny little bit about refuge points and the purpose of those and the importance of communication. So legislation, I guess, is out there basically because we've had so many disasters in the years for fire-related ones that we've had to up the ante as such, and quite often it's after a major incident has taken place. So if you think about Bradford Fire, if you think about King's Cross, go back a long time ago when we had to put fire curtains in theatres because of a wooden theatre burning down and deaths of, I think it was over 180 people died. Think more recently about Grenfell as a disaster as such, and all the changes we're going to have to put in place as a result of that. So there are lots of requirements. From a design perspective, buildings have to comply with British standards in terms of the fire detection systems, fire alarm systems. In terms of the law, there is the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, which I'll talk about, but there's also, again, going back to building design, are the building regulations, which I think as a result of Grenfell in the next couple of years, they're going to definitely change for high-rise occupancies. The Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order has links to the housing, communities and local government. So there are laws around that, but it does say building a safer future in the title of that. The regulatory reform itself, which is the law of the land. Then you've got the guidance that's given out to employers and fire risk assessors like myself and others to be able to give support, should we say, to people in employment, to companies like Athelis, and also staff that work there as well, and members on occasions. So let's look at what typically happens. So we have to comply with all these areas, and what we try to do is do the risk assessment, which is a requirement by law, and then make sure that everything complies in line with that. So it starts with the risk assessment, but that becomes a management tool to then say, have we got sufficient systems and procedures in place? Does everything work? And there are things like checking out that fire extinguishers are serviced, checking out that fire doors shut properly, checking out that emergency lighting systems are going to be illuminated in the event of something going wrong or a fire alarm activation, and so on and so forth. So there's all these things that are built into the risk management of fire to ultimately eliminate or control. Typically, the fire procedure is an alarm is activated, then people are then escorted out. Okay, think differently at Athelis as the club itself, in parts, particularly in the wet areas, so on the ground floor and in the indoor and outdoor pool, and then upstairs, not the champagne bar, but at the side of that, all the wet areas, the sauna as such. And the concern there, which I'll come to later, is because of the fact that people are in their swimsuits, and we're going to ask them to evacuate outside in inclement weathers and all kinds of conditions, and therefore it does become a last resort. So I'll come back to that later. However, typical fire procedures in companies is to get people out of the building, but also to check that there's nobody left inside the building. And the reason for that is so that when the fire brigade do arrive, they want to just fight the fire from outside, because then their staff themselves, their own fire guys and girls, you know, that are typically trained and have all the kit. But the last thing the chief fire officer wants to do is send in his staff, his officers, unnecessarily. So if they want to know that the building is empty, when they know that, then they'll say, right, let's fight the fire from the outside. So there's those aspects, but then they need to know about different companies in terms of the types of risks and the major concerns. Like, could there be a gas explosion? Could the laundry area become inflamed and cause problems? What about the plant room itself and the issues around that? So all of that comes together to then decide as to what method is used to put the fire out if it starts to spread through the building. And then the chief fire officer will make decisions. So the typical fire procedure is get everybody out, do a sweep on the way around. Certain people with responsibility will check certain areas. And once you confirm that the building is empty, then and everybody's outside of the marshalling point, should we say, the fire muster area, the far side of the car park, then they're away from the risk. So that's typical of ours. However, what I'm now saying is that I want fire marshals, first responders, fire wardens, whatever you want to call them, to, in a controlled manner, I don't want you to put yourselves at risk, but I want you to check. I want you to do that sweep to make sure that the ground floor is empty, the first floor is empty, the second floor is empty, and then all that information comes together at the end to say, yeah, the building is empty and we're safe. So bear in mind, it's covered by insurance. The building can rebuild and we can get over a disaster. The other thing I'd like you to consider is if it's a small fire, I mean, all fires start off small and then they start to grow. So if you can fight the fire comfortably, then and not putting yourself at risk, then have a go. This is very much an optional issue. We can't force people to do this because the human element is that some people literally freak out and just cannot respond in the expected manner because it's a fire situation. Others can take it under their wing and just go and do their bit. However, some people are a bit altruistic and they go overboard and they say, look at me, the hero and the champion. Don't want that either. We want that fine balance between, if it's a small fire and it can be put out without making things worse and let it grow, then do so, but only use one fire extinguisher and only if you have a safe means of exit behind you. So the fire's there, you're here, and the exit's behind you. That's always the rule. So if safe to do so, it's always the qualification statement. So there's 3 levels of fire response typically in companies. The fire marshal tends to be the head honcho who's overseeing this. So this may be a duty manager. It may be Garth, it may be David, but you never know. Keith might be on site at the site. Whoever it is, it doesn't matter really, so long as they're coordinating activities. The first responder is slightly different. They're doing all the running around in the building and checking things out. But when a fire alarm activation takes place, usually the fire marshal is stood close to the fire alarm itself, so they can see where the zones are. They can see and ask a first responder to go to the area where the fire may be. It could be a false alarm, you see. So we have to check and confirm that it is in fact a fire. So there's those aspects that go on. And then there's fire wardens, which is very similar to a first responder, but sometimes a fire warden will make sure that people don't come back into the building. Or they might just be given a duty to oversee one particular area and then make sure that everything's as it should be in that area. But over and above that, there's this thing called call challenge. So I just want to go through this. And a lot of people are quite surprised, but interestingly, the fire brigade don't come out if you phone 999. Don't immediately respond. Similarly, if you have an automatic response linked to your alarm system, which many companies do, it doesn't mean they will automatically come. What tends to happen is there's a second or third party that's involved. They phone up the premises to what was known as the key holder, and they will say, we've had a fire alarm activation. It's been notified to us. Are you expecting the fire brigade to respond? They want confirmation that there is in fact a fire. And quite often, particularly in domestic premises, they are allowed to wait for 2 calls to come through. One could be a hoax. The second is highly unlikely it's going to be a hoax. So that's why we're saying it's called challenge, because what we really want is the fire and rescue service to actually be involved in fighting fires when they're needed. What you don't want them is stuck down, 50 miles away, waiting for an absolute hoax and then having to get back to the fire station and then having to respond later. So that's the concern here. This has been introduced 10 years ago now, and it's been a common practice. So please be aware that it needs a couple of people to form 999 just to confirm that there is a fire. And then part of this response I was talking about earlier in terms of who does what, it could well be that the fire marshal, the duty manager, whoever it is that's near the fire panel, has then said to a first responder, you go out to zone 2, that's where the fire alarm's activated. So off they go to the gym area, and they either see that there is a fire in the gym, or they see, well, there's no signs at all. So they'll do a little bit further investigation. And if they find that maybe there's some dust in the air that set off a smoke detector, then they'll say false alarm. So what you do is if you have this role between confirmation that there is in fact a fire, then the duty manager or the fire marshal in charge will then phone 999 and say, yes, it's definitely a fire. And that way, they're more likely to respond in the manner and style expected. So please be aware that that can perhaps slow down a little bit the emergency response time. Typically, companies are around 5 to 8 minutes of investigation time before response from the fire brigade. Okay, so over and above this, I mentioned earlier about some of the control measures. A fire risk assessment has been done for Athelis. I've done it myself, and I've looked at all the risks, I've rated the risks, and then we put action plans together to upgrade the standards. We've got high standards in many areas of the club. There's a couple of areas we could make improvements. For example, as I'll show you later, the exit route from the wet area up on the second floor, if you go down that stairwell, there's perhaps not enough fire safety signs to indicate where you're going. But the people typically know that route anyway, because they probably come up from the changing room areas next to the swimming pool and gone up the wet stairwell or in the lift. So there's that aspect. Or whilst I mention lifts in Athelis are not designed for fire response. So when the fire alarm activates, they will come down to the ground floor and not move until we've had a full reset. So bear that in mind as well, that we can't rely on the lifts for fire evacuation. So again, when I talk about refuge later on, take Ben as an example, who comes in quite often, who's an Olympian, should we say, Paralympics, and he's in his wheelchair. They don't always have to be in a wheelchair. You've got to think about visually impaired, physically impaired, and hearing impaired, and whether they can respond when the alarm goes off. Can they themselves detect the alarm and the need to exit the building? So there's those reasons that we have to have extra systems and procedures in place to support that. But nevertheless, as you can probably see from some of the index, this is only one of the pages, but it's a big document, and it helps me to then say the building itself, the people that are in it, and the way that it's managed. Collectively, it's a low risk and it remains safe. But it also means that in that remaining safe, that we make sure we do things on a regular basis. There's certain expectations, like fire sounder checks, which I'll show you on the next one. We need to be able to hear the fire sounders. If we press the manual call points, which are the red boxes, again, I'll show you later on. If we hit that, we need to know that each one of those is operational and they will always work when we need them. Similarly, fire extinguishers, you've got to check fire extinguishers annually. They've got to be serviced, and so on and so forth. So there are things within the fire procedures that get put into a fire log, a record that things are being done to show that the management of fire risks is taken seriously. One part of it, and that's why we're here today, is this training that's necessary to staff to be able to respond effectively. So a couple of points. The fire sounder test should be taken on a weekly basis. They're usually not quiet periods, but the purpose of the fire sounder tests is to make sure that the alarm works and people can hear it in different locations. The siren will sound typically between 10 and 20 seconds, so that it gives time for people to hear and respond if need be. If the alarm is activated at any other time, then that we need to treat that as an actual fire evacuation, and people need to exit the building and go to the fire muster points. Once they're at that muster point or the assembly point, people are usually told, remain there until you give an instruction, but also remain at their point until a duty officer, duty manager, or the fire authorities, let's say the chief fire officer responded, has done their visual check and they've confirmed and they've done a reset of the fire alarm and everything's gone as it should do, it's silenced the alarm. At that point, then we can tell members as well as staff to return to the building. So the fire sounder test, typically it requires a person to be at the fire alarm itself. So you'll have one person at the fire alarm, and then all the others are these manual call points, the red boxes that are on the wall, typically close to fire exit points. The idea of that is so that people will respond quite quickly. And if, for example, as I call it, the final exit point, if you're going outside through a fire door, it's always next to that fire door. So you can, I always say, don't be greedy. You know, if you've seen the fire, if you've seen the signs of the fire, set the alarm off manually. That's why they're called manual call points. So going back to what I was saying, this opportunity is that on a weekly basis, we can do these tests. And the test will tell us that the sounders are working. The test will tell us that the manual call points are working. And what we can do is with a special key, we can do a reset. So we set it off, we use the panel, then a person's going to different points over a year. Typically, each one of those manual call points have to be tested at least once over the year. And then the sounder needs to be checked in a variety of different locations. So by doing these manual call points, the other thing you're doing is checking the sounders at the same time. Now, the loudness of a sounder should be very loud, so it makes people want to get out, not put up with the noise because it's quiet and it's just a little bit irritating. It's actually designed to be very irritating so that it's uncomfortable and people want to get out of the area. That's the idea behind it. But certain members, should we say, and certain people think they're above and beyond this and don't have to respond. So I just wanted to get you to think about the fire exits and the escape routes that are available. So if you think about in the area where the plant room is, for example, top right corner there, there's also the fire exit from the field, the roof area. Yeah, so you've got that big stairwell that will take you outside there. You've also got the chemical stores at the side of it as well, which is a fire exit door as well. You've got the plant room doors, which is a fire exit door. Then the main one we have is, if you're in the wet area, if you think about it, come in from the pool, you go along the side of the pool, then you go into the wet stairwell area, and the doorway at the end of the wet stairwell area is the fire exit point. Yeah, so that's a major one because it's a protected stairwell, just like the other stairwell is protected at this top corner as well, which leads to your final exit point. It's kind of coming down from the field, but it's squeezed in the corner next to the plant room on the plants. We also have available to us is the main reception area, which is classed as a fire exit as well. And you've got the restaurant area, which could be used as a fire exit. So there's plenty of fire exit routes available. However, you have to think about the human element. People don't always go the way you expect them to go. And therefore, the importance of fire signs will give them some direction. And also be aware that we're a bit like sheep. So if we came in one way, we tend to want to go back the same way. And that again can be problematic. However, if the signage is good, which it tends to be here, and if you have lots of fire extinguishers, which we also have, then there's less chance of a fire spreading, and there's more opportunity, what we call means of escape. So you can go to the corridors, you can go through the stairwells, and in a low risk environment, you can get out of the building. So be mindful also of not blocking fire exit routes. So in terms of visual checks, if you're just doing your wandering around, every now and again, just make sure the door is accessible and it can be opened. Again, in the stairwell down to the bottom from the field or the roof, That has some stored equipment and bits and pieces at the bottom there. You'll see in a picture shortly. I'd rather they were removed, but they're not flammable, so I'm not overly worried. It's not going to impact too much on your escape route, but they should remain low risk areas. So try to avoid putting unnecessary storage. Oh, I forgot to mention as well, the other fire exit route is also through the laundry. So I'll show you a picture of that later as well. The assembly point is the far side of the car park. There is in fact a pitch, a kind of like a power, I don't know what to call it, a power station, I'm going to call it, a brick building, a very small square brick building in the top corner. So as you make your entrance in through the barrier area, it's kind of to your left. So that's typically where we'll ask people to muster. Yeah, so this is, I just wanted to show you this as a short video, just showing you one of the exit routes. Okay, so if we go down, this is in the gym on the first floor, you go into the fire escape there, should remain low risk. It's got good illumination going down there so you can see what you're doing, think about smoke building up, and then you've got your route out. And that's what I was saying before, that there's bits and pieces down the bottom there. But nevertheless, when you hit the final exit door, it should always be unobstructed, and then you can make your way out to the far side of the car park. I don't know what's happened with my pictures here. They've all turned side on, so apologies here. I'll rectify that later. In the pool area, you've got 2 fire exit signs. In the reception, you've got 2 fire exit signs. This one here in the bottom right-hand corner is supposed to show us the route through from the gents' changing rooms, and then there's a sign here at the second sign there actually directs people through the laundry. So again, it's important to make sure that the path through the laundry remains open and clear, which isn't always the case. You need a plan of action, and this is typically the questions that are asked, but they tend to look like a fire evacuation procedure. What do you do in the event of? But some of the questions you need to ask is, how will you communicate? We have radios in reception, and people are carrying radios around with them quite often. If you're a first responder, that's very, very useful. It can get you to then go to the point where the fire zone says it's that area where the alarm has been activated. Then you can communicate via the radio with the duty manager who's going to be at the side of the fire panel. So that two-way communication is very important as such. But also thinking about members and communicating with members to get them out safely. Make sure you're going the right way and make sure they're following the rules. You know, don't go past, go and pick up £200. It's the same kind of thing here. Don't go into the change rooms, get changed, pick up all your personal belongings before you exit. No, that's not what we want. We want them to get out swiftly and not think about the personal aspects. And go back in that later if it's safe to do so and if we put the fire out. So there's those aspects that need to be considered within that control. So the roles then of the people involved, whether you call them fire marshals or first responders, the marshal themselves oversees things, gives us a good idea as to who's doing what, tells people where to go to in the event of. But then the people that support them are the first responders. Some companies have a second fire marshal, so if the first person's not available, they can step in, which is great from a client perspective. But from a secondary point of view, it could be that whilst the fire marshal's tied up, the second fire marshal could do some extra things. So pick up the fire safety box, which has high-vis jackets in or vests in that people can put on, maps inside there with information about what to do, where to go, and then also giving instructions on keeping people outside of the building so they don't put themselves at risk. So there's those aspects of what the fire marshal does. But then you've got the first responders that are going to be going around different areas and covering different aspects of fire safety. And this is the idea of sweeping, just checking that the area is in fact clear. Over and above that, there might be a need to also check your refuge points. So is there someone at any of the refuge points? Again, there's a communication system at the reception area, very close to the fire panel. So you can communicate with wherever they are in the 6 different refuge points on site. And there will be they'll push that green button and then they'll say, I'm on the stairwell on the first floor near the gym. So you can see, all right, that's at the back end of the gym. Right, I know where they are. And the instruction I'll give, stay there, you're in a low risk area. And if we have to move you, then I'll send a team of people in to get you out. So there's those aspects. But the key thing about the role is to, if you're given an area of responsibility, is to just make sure that from a planning perspective, that you cover your area and then make sure that area is clear. There's nobody left inside it, there's nobody at risk. And then outside, or when you get back to the fire marshal at reception, you say, I've done my area, it's all clear. Yeah, so the means of communication comes in there as well. So primary objective of the first responder is to check the area, make sure it's cleared. They may be required to assist people to get out of the building. They may be required to investigate and confirm that the fire or smoke is present in their designated area. Now, what I do say is you do that without putting yourself at risk. So typically as you're approaching an area, you'll be able to use your senses, see it, smell it. In some cases, you might put your hand, the back of your hand on a handle, rather than grabbing the handle of a door, put your hand along the back of the handle. And if there's hot, another feeling, if it's hot to touch, then perhaps it means that behind the door, there is in fact a fire. So then you'll use your other senses. You'll be looking at the bottom of the door, the top of the door, seeping to see any smoke seeping through. And again, then touch the back of the door itself to feel if there's any heat on it. And believe me, if it's a big fire, do not open that door because you're going to put yourself and others at risk. It's then going to compromise that compartment and the fire can then spread from behind the door into the area where you are. So I don't want you to put yourself at risk. Just need you to confirm that there is either smoke or fire. And as soon as you see signs of that, backtail out of the place and just tell the fire marshal at the fire panel that I have confirmed there is a fire and it's too big to be able to put out. Also, in order to keep people out, you might be involved in crowd control and reassuring them and working with members to say, we're really sorry about this, but it is an awkward situation, but we've just got to do our best under the circumstances. At the end of the day, it's an emergency. So they've got to put up with it. And I know they won't like it, but it's better that they got out and then suffered. They may be involved in monitoring final exits to prevent people from re-entering the building as well. So again, from a safe distance, you don't have to be inside the door itself, but get close enough to the door and make sure that people are escorted towards the muster point, the assembly point, and stay away from the building. So they might put on either jackets, that's quite often that companies do that. You might apply the areas where you're going to sweep and you're going to check on what your very responsible will be. You might close doors and windows or anything that you feel could contribute risk to the fire. You'll check the areas, including toilets and refuge points. And there may be a need to communicate, to evacuate using designated routes. Now, when you do communicate, you've got to give them, let's say you're going into the changing room area and you're the opposite sex, then you've got to be careful how you do that. So announce yourself loudly, hello, is anyone there? And from that, then they can take the appropriate action. Okay. A good thing about any fire evacuation is the opportunity to get involved in a debrief afterwards. What have we learned from this incident? What can we do better next time? Where were the weak spots? And how can we make improvements? There's always variations because we can't predict what fire will do and why the fire alarm went off. So what about the times when someone does use the refuge point, and did we evacuate them sensibly and accurately and timely? And what if you're not in your area when the alarm sounds? Well, we're not going to say run to that area and put yourself at risk. It's always qualified by if safe to do so. So make your way towards it, but then if you can't, you just literally get out. And then you tell that to the fire warden, and they can then say, we're able to do checks everywhere else, but we've not been able to check in that area. And then the fire rescue service can make a choice as to whether they'll investigate that themselves or just choose to put the fire out from going into the building. So typically, people, when they see the signs of fire, they raise the alarm, they press the manual call point, or as we would have here, we've got detectors that will set off the fire alarm. As I mentioned before, the importance of dialing 999 because there will be call challenge, but you do that when you've confirmed that it is in fact a fire. Fight the fire only if competent to do so. Yeah, so, and I should qualify that by saying if you're confident to do so, as well as being competent. Leave the building by your nearest means of escape. Go to the assembly area, and that's a standard approach. The only difference I would say is that for first responders, I'm asking you to do the sweep. So the sweep. If I always qualify if safe to do so. So you go into the area and you're always conscious of the fact that the alarm's going off. I need to do this relatively quickly. I need to check as much as I can, but I can't put myself at risk. Yeah, so you go to your area of responsibility, use those safe techniques to check doors. So lower yourself down just in case there's backflash when you open the door up. Touch with the back of your hand on the handle. Use your senses before opening the door. And I usually say, if you're on your knee and your knee's close to the door opening, then that'll act as a wedge, which is good because you probably stop the door from being blown open. But if not, put your foot very close to the door and inch it open a small amount. So again, it'll chock it or wedge it in some respects so it doesn't blow the door open. Call into the room that you're going to be saying, make yourself known, announce yourself. Is there anybody there? You know, loud, clear, and make sure that it can be heard. Or walk into that area and check that the room is empty. You know, so you might do both. You've not had any response from saying, hello, is anyone there? Waited, not heard anything, walk into the room. Yeah. Then you'll check those various compartments. There might be, let's say, the changing rooms, there might be cubicles that they're inside the cubicles, there might be in the family changing room, there might be in the disabled changing room, there might be in the showers, and so on. So there's all those variations on a theme that perhaps need checking before you move on. Quite often, people are having a crafty smoke in some buildings, and that sends the fire alarm off when they know they should be outside the building. And if it's in the changing room area, that could be the reason why the fire alarm's activated. So by going into that and finding that person, then you can say, there's no fire, I can now confirm that there's not a fire, someone's been smoking. Or it could be malicious. You know, sometimes people do it unintentionally, but sometimes they'll look at where the detector head is in the building, get an aerosol and straight to the detector. So it sets it off. So again, you'll be able to use your senses and see the evidence that's around you in qualifying some of the reasons behind this. But nevertheless, it's checking the area. So you're checking that there's nobody in the area, it's empty of people. That's the key thing behind it. And then upon completion, leave the building and report to the lead fire marshal at the reception area, should we say, where the fire panel is. Communicate. If you've got a radio, you don't have to do that. Go straight to the fire muster point and use the radio to tell the chief fire marshal or the chief fire officer. Okay, I mentioned a little bit before about the concern, should we say, on changing rooms, the sensitivity of it, particularly if it's males going in females and females going into male changing rooms. Yeah? So think about the potential issues that could cause, but also think about the variations of where a person might be at any one time and whether they can find their way out. There's ample fire exit signs, so people should be able to follow those, but sometimes it might lead them to an area perhaps they've not been before. So for example, they're in the changing rooms, they've never used the pools before, they only use the gym, and then suddenly the fire exit sign is directing them past the showers, going into the internal swimming pool, and then they have to follow it to that route at the back, which they've not done before. Okay, so I guess confidence comes with experience, but if they've not been members for very long, there's always that concern, should we say, that somebody could go the wrong way. And eventually, when they've gone from the change room, through past the showers, down along the side of the pool, and then they get to the wet area, there's that final exit door. It's a big, heavy door. If there's nobody else around when they try to tackle it, they might even wrongfully think that it's locked. So again, checking and checking will make sure that people go in the right direction. Think about King's Cross fire. It's awful to say this, but in the King's Cross fire, people were down, they were going down towards danger, but then somebody said something, but there's a lot of smoke here. Are we going the right way? So they turned around. And in turning around, they should have gone straight back up. So as they were going up, they saw smoke up the top of the escalators. And then they thought, oh, well, the fire must be at the top. So they turned back and came back, unfortunately, to their death, went back into the area where the fire had started. So means of escape and the direction that people take in the event of a fire is very important. Get them thinking about it. Wet areas, another sensitive issue. Yeah, I mentioned earlier about we don't really want them to evacuate. We'd like them to evacuate where possible. Now, think about Grenfell and the fact that keeping people inside a building that's fire is spreading and the potential for it. Nothing like that here because of the design of the building. There's always low risk areas. So what we want them to do, because they're in the swimwear, we don't want them to go outside and be cold and get wet in the inclement weather. But if we have to do, we'll issue them with foil wraps so that at that point where we've confirmed it's a fire, it's spreading in the direction towards those people and we couldn't put the fire out. When we've made that decision, then get them out of the building and issue them with foil wraps. So there's that aspect of the sensitive issue, should we say, in terms of where they go. You may also get some awkward members that say, well, I'm in the swim pool, it's low risk. There's nothing better than water to put fire out, I'm safe here. Well, we don't really want them doing that. But they might consider, how about if we go through the exit door and then we're inside the outdoor pool in the water. You know, for a short period of time, to keeping them warm, it might be ample to do that. But quite a few of our members might have their robes with them, so they can wrap themselves up warm. If that's the case, balance it right, think about the sensitivity of it, but hopefully stay inside until it's absolutely necessary, and then they've got to clear the building if the fire spreads, regardless of where it is. So I just wanted to show you this video. If you see now the route you take from the wet area on the second floor. So you've got the fire exit point there, through that door, and this is where I was saying that signage is not great, but you kind of roughly know where you're going to go anyway. There's the manual call point, there's the refuge point, there's fire extinguishers. It's all good in that design, but here you might, unless you see a sign saying go this way, go down the stairs, it might confuse. Think about it when it's full of smoke, if there is in fact a fire. Maybe the fire started on ground floor, it's making its way up through the corridor. That can cause confusion. So they've got down to the first floor now, then they keep going all the way down to the ground. And this is what I was saying before. Right at the bottom of the stairwell, you've got that big door to make your way to a position of safety. Final exit point. It's a push handle, but like I said, it's a big heavy door and can pose issues for some who are not that strong. Okay, so I want to finish off the session with focusing now on the aspects about fires themselves, how fire can spread, and then how we would then use a variety of techniques to try and put the fire out. So that hopefully, and I really hope you're never in a position where you have to do this, but hopefully if you have to fight a fire, that you'll be prepared, confident and competent to do so. So it should actually be foresight, because there's a chemical reaction that takes place, and you need certain things to happen in that chemical reaction to actually complete combustion. But nevertheless, we'll stick with the fire triangle. We need fuel, oxygen, and an ignition source or heat. Okay, so when the fire starts, we then consider how it can spread: conduction, convection, radiation, and direct burning. If I use this picture, it might help you to understand a little better. So let's say the fire starts here in this waste paper bit. From a convection point of view, heat rises. Okay, so there's that aspect where it could go to the ceiling, the smoke as such is very hot and it starts to burn the ceiling, and then fire can spread down. Radiated heat, so it might be this small fire here, but the radiation causes other combustibles in the close proximity to set fire as well, so you've got fire spread that way. Conduction, it may well be that through pipes, let's say radiator pipes and the likes of, so the rooms on this side is on fire, but the heat's so big going through the pipe by conduction that it causes another fire with fuels in other areas. And then there's direct burning itself. So fuel next to another fuel, next to another fuel, just moves from one to the next to the next. So those are four key principles of fire spread. In building designs, what we try to do is compartmentalize areas so that it stays in that one small area for as long as possible before it spreads. And then through convection, more so than anything, we think about, well, what if it does go through the fire door And then where will it go? Has it got the opportunity to go upwards? And if it can go up, we need to make sure that extra protection is provided on those stairwells in particular, take us from one compartment, ground, to the first to the second floor. So it's important, I guess, that fire doors remain shut after people have evacuated. And then it contains, should we say, the spread of the fire. It stops it because it doesn't convect through into the next area. But nevertheless, the other means of fire spread can then eventually take hold. However, we've got an hour typically, in some cases 4 hours, dependent on the design of the materials used in that area, that can make the difference. So the minimum is the means of escape has got to offer everybody a 1 hour protection. Some doors only offer 30 minutes, but generally the design here has given us 1 hour protection. The hazards associated with fire, well, it's well known now that most people involved in fires die of the smoke before they're hit by the flames or the heat itself. And they can tell that by the amount of smoke that's inside the lungs when they do an inquest afterwards. So there's that aspect. But there's oxygen that's taken away because it's burning it up in the fire itself. So it depletes the area of oxygen. So if you're in a restricted space and there's no open windows or doorways, that can cause suffocation. The flames and the heat itself causing burning. Combustibles that eventually maybe cause explosions because they're gaseous. And then ultimately you've got structural failure. So the building itself starts to collapse as a result of the load bearing beams and the likes of collapsing and destroying. So consequences: burns, inhalation smoke, toxic fumes, and ultimately death. For the other consequences over and above that is building damage, loss of business and jobs, transport disruption, environmental damage, and flora and fauna damage as well. So that's the typical consequences of a fire. So obviously we want to prevent this from happening wherever we can. So fires don't make appointments, and that's one of the biggest issues. I always say to people, treat it as an actual incident, even if it is a false alarm, because there's opportunity to learn from every time we have a false alarm. They do tend to happen more at home than they do at work. The statistics proves that more people are killed at home, much more people are killed at home than they are at workplace. All big fires start as little fires, so if we can hit them while they're little, perhaps we can stop it from spreading. People do die too often in fires, and most are killed by the smoke before, in fact, the burns themselves. And then obviously knowing what to do, being confident and competent can actually save people's lives. So, as I said earlier, typically what happens is people know where to go and what to do. It's good that we know where and what to go and what to do, but sometimes, even with the evidence surrounding us, bad decisions are made. So, this example is 1971 in Woolworths in Liverpool. 11 people died on the upper section. I think it's the 3rd floor where the restaurant is. And some people, they say, were eating because they paid for the meal. They thought, well, I'm going to finish my meal before I leave. It's probably a false alarm anyway. And then the one lady that's on her own here got confused and didn't know where the nearest fire exit was because the signage wasn't evident. And then when the smoke did start to overcome the area, it's a very busy area, as you can probably see, and therefore she didn't know where to go and what to do, and she died as a result of that. But the majority of the concern here is that they made the way towards the low-risk fire stairwell, but didn't actually make it there because they responded too slowly. So it's important that we try and get a quick response from when a fire alarm activates and people going out. So it is always voluntary to use fire extinguishers. We can't force people to do it. And the key things are, when the alarm goes off, if you're a first responder and you've got to check where the fire might be, then always keep your eye out as to where the nearest fire extinguishers are. Always make sure that you know where your means of escape is, so that in the event of having to fight the fire, you can then go in that direction afterwards. And as I said before, make sure that area is clear so that when you make attempts with one extinguisher to put it out, you can still make your way out safely. Sometimes, if you imagine, you might be going to an area, you might want to get to a final exit point, or you might want to get to a stairwell, a low risk area. But in order to do so, you've got to pass the fire itself. So if you feel competent enough to have a go, then it might aid your escape by using the fire extinguisher to clear a path so you can get to the fire exit door. It's only used in the early stages. And like I say, only use one fire extinguisher. Don't be altruistic. Don't say, oh, I've used one, but I know what I'm doing. I'll pick another fire extinguisher up. And then when I've used that, I'll pick another fire extinguisher. It's not the idea. It's just have one go and then get out. So if you're aware of different types of fire extinguishers, you might know that certain limitations on what they can and can't do. And like I said, I've done the fire risk assessment, so I know that the positioning and type of fire extinguishers that we've got eliminates that concern. You don't have to worry about which one you pick up. It's more a case of just grab one and use it. For fires that involve electrical equipment, I would say it's better to use the CO2 carbon dioxide. If you ever use a powder extinguisher, it's very messy. If you use a water extinguisher, sometimes the water damage can be more damaging the fire than the fire itself, but that's not an issue. The only concern, I guess, is if there's electricity and you use water on the electricity, there's potential for electric shock. So I always focus on that fact. Say, when you're choosing it, look to see whether there's electricity that's caused ignition, and then eliminate it if you can. So unplug it, or switch it off, or go to the isolator point and turn the power off before hitting it with a water extinguisher. If you can't do that, then use a CO2 extinguisher. So there's a variety of different types. As I said before, I've looked at the risks, materials in the area, and I've decided what needs to be in those areas, so you don't have to worry too much about the type that you choose. But the majority of ones that we have on site here are CO2, carbon dioxide, and also water. So that's the majority in place. So there's different methods to use. If you think about the fire triangle, where we've got heavy levels of fuel, what we'll try and do is starve it of fuel, remove it where we can. If we can smother it, we can remove the oxygen, so we can cover it up either by chemical reaction, and sometimes that's done by the CO2, where it acts as a smothering as well as a cooling agent. And similarly, the last one is to cool it down at the same time. So that's why I use CO2, because it covers both smothering oxygen and cooling heat as well. Whereas water extinguishers are just for cooling the heat. So the idea there is if you can bring it down to below the temperature of combustion, then it will then stop the fire from continuing. Now, with every fire extinguisher, on the side of it has these icons. They're very simple, and it's quite quick and easy to look at and then decipher whether it's the right extinguisher, and then secondly, what method you use. So on the left-hand side in the red with the white font, you've got pull the pin out, aim it at the base of the fire, and squeeze the lever. So the difference might be is the second one. It's just about the method. It might not say aim it at the base of the fire. It might say aim for the back of the fire and come forwards. Powder extinguishers typically do that. If you're using a CO2 extinguisher, if you aim it at the base of the fire, you might actually spread it out. So you're better off allowing it to go over the top and swinging it around in a controlled fashion. The key point is to read what the icon says and then act in the same manner when you're trying to extinguish the fire. So before attempting to tackle the fire, raise the alarm. Yeah, we're lucky here that there's a number of detectors that the alarm will probably kick off anyway. But if it's, let's say you're in a small room, like I'm on the second floor here, near the champagne bar in the PT office, if it's in this room here and the waste basket starts to go and it's full of combustibles and it's a small fire, then I perhaps would pick up an extinguisher just outside down the corridor and come back and set it off. But the one thing I would do is hit the alarm anyway. Ensure that people are being evacuated. Yeah, so you're attempting the fire, but just have a look around and see that people are getting out, and use your voice if you need to. There's a fire in here. Can you make your way out, please? Yeah, so think about that and make sure someone has called the fire brigade. So constantly communicating plays an important part. Fire doors, as I mentioned earlier, they give an aspect of protection. So it can be from as little as 20 minutes all the way through to 3 hours, depending on where it is, what the design of it is, what the materials are involved, and whether it's got intumescent strips. It relies on a self-closing device. So the self-closer brings it to the closed position. And when it's at the closed position, it stays in that unless there's effort put onto it to open it up. So there's that aspect of when it is in the closed position, it creates a good seal. And then when the fire tries to spread, if it's got intumescent strips, the strips swell and block the gaps. And then it compartments, it keeps it in that area and it doesn't spread out into the next room. So it's a good thing to have in place, but you need fire doors to do what they want, what they need to do, to be closed to contain the fire. So once people have gone through it, self-closer will bring it to a shut, and then if heat then tries to spread, it may offer enough time of protection, typically an hour, for people to get out of the building safely. Refuge points, mentioned this earlier. Yeah, what about if Ben's on site and he's in the gym and we're then saying, well, the lift's not available, just make your way to the refuge point. You're in a low-risk corridor. The main stairwell down to reception, the doors are going to shut and create as a compartment, so you should be relatively safe in this area. And what we'll do is we'll stay with you, or we'll send someone up, and we'll use the evac chair if it's absolutely necessary to get you out. But what we don't want to do is you to try and evacuate, and then we find that it's a false alarm. So please just stay there, and we'll sort it out, and we'll be constantly in communication with you. And then remind him to just keep pressing that button and talking to people throughout that time period. Come on. So, in summary, fire deserves our respect. Treat all alarms as real until you're told otherwise. You know, if somebody then comes along and says, I've checked it out, it's false alarm, great. But till you're confirmed, then treat it as a real situation. When you discover a fire, raise the alarm, call the fire brigade and leave the building. Yeah. We're not saying there, fight the fire. It's purely optional if you feel confident and competent to do so. Always know where to go and what to do. It's worthwhile having a walk around, doing a quick spec on the building. Just remind yourself where the fire exits are. Fire prevention, so getting rid of fuels, getting rid of ignition sources, do regular checks and so on is always better than fighting a fire. So bear that in mind. And we all carry responsibility for fire safety. We can't just say, we'll wait till the fire brigade gets here. We've got that opportunity, should we say, to make sure we do as much as we physically and possibly can without putting ourselves and others at risk. Okay, so thank you for this session. As well as this, I'm going to give you a link to YouTube to show you fire extinguishers. I think it's Chubb is the company, but they show you how fire extinguishers are used. And that way, what you can do is have a look at that and work out from the CO2, the carbon dioxide and the water, just check how they use the method to put the fire out in those situations. So you maybe watch this and you have a look at that 12-minute video, I think it is, as well. Hopefully you'll feel more confident and competent to either fight a fire or decide not to, having all the information in front of you and then moving on, should we say, afterwards. So thanks for your attendance and watching this video. Hopefully you'll never ever have to use any of this, but the idea is that if it does happen, you are prepared. Thank you.